Greetings, comrades! The year is 2025, and despite the assurances of Elon Musk that he will open the door to space, a trip outside our planet is still a pipe dream for the majority of the Earth's population. I'm not even talking about the fact that becoming a cosmonaut is very hard and you have to be the best of the best, it's obvious. It's just that if you want to become a space explorer, you need to be born in the right country. A country that is technologically advanced enough to launch a man into space. There are actually only 3 countries that can launch their own rockets and organize independent human spaceflight: Russia, the United States, and China. The space superpowers. Well, to be precise, first it was the USSR, then the US, then China. And don't you think that's kind of unfair? Guess what? The Soviet Union thought so too, and that's why in 1967 it launched the Interkosmos program, which was designed to open up space for everyone. Overall, since the first human spaceflight, citizens of 48 countries have flown in space. The most recent additions to the list in 2024 were a Turk and a Belarusian. A year earlier, Antigua and Barbuda representatives got there, thanks to a lottery organized by Virgin Galactic. But it was only 90 minutes, and it was only a suborbital spaceflight, hardly should be considered full-fledged cosmonauts. If you go up this timeline, it becomes more interesting, because in the 20th century there was no such blatant space tourism yet. For example, the 21st and 22nd countries whose representatives have been in space were such highly developed nations as Japan and Great Britain. Right above them, Afghanistan. One spot higher, Syria. And among the top 10 countries whose citizens were the first to travel into space are Cuba, Vietnam, and Mongolia. Mongolia! How did this happen? Of course, thanks to the Interkosmos program. Look at this monument. It is located in Moscow near the Prazhskaya metro station, and is dedicated to the first international space flight in the history of mankind. By the name of the metro station, you could guess that the first person in space who was not from the USSR or the USA was a Czechoslovak citizen, Vladimir Remek. It happened in 1978, and this flight of the Soyuz 28 spacecraft became the loudest success of the Interkosmos program. But of course, such things as international space flights are planned not even for years, but for decades. So to understand what all this Interkosmos was, we go back more than 10 years, to 1965. It was in April of that year that the governments of Bulgaria, China, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, DPRK, Hungary, GDR, Vietnam, Mongolia, Poland, Romania and Yugoslavia received rather unexpected letters from Moscow. They were unexpected because representatives of these countries were invited to a meeting in Moscow devoted to joining efforts of socialist countries in the study and exploration of space. Normally, joining efforts in something means that both sides are already engaged in that something. As you guessed, Vietnam and Romania in 1965 did not think much about space exploration and did not really understand how they could help the Soviet Union, the recognized leader of the space race, in this regard. But they did send their delegates to Moscow, and as it turned out, not for nothing. The USSR's proposal turned out to be not so crazy and quite tempting, and even without any military undertones: joint scientific research in space. By the way, not all countries agreed, minus China, whose relations with the USSR were by then far from ideal, and North Korea, which was between two fires in this conflict. Yugoslavia refused too. Tito did not dare to decisively choose a camp, and Vietnam, which had much more important problems at that time. With the participation of all the others, the Council for International Cooperation in the Exploration and Peaceful Use of Outer Space at the USSR Academy of Sciences was born, which later became known as the Interkosmos Council. To be more precise, such councils were established in all 9 participating countries. At first, the main goal of the program was to launch satellites and geophysical rockets for various fields of research. Space physics, meteorology, radio wave propagation in the atmosphere, space biology, and later remote Earth sensing was added. By the way, do not think that it was some handout from the Soviet Union and the participation of other countries was only nominal. No, the scientific equipment and the experiments themselves were developed by scientists and specialists of the partner country, and the Soviet Union just guaranteed the launch and operation of the spacecraft. Cosmos 261 became a trial balloon in 1968. The satellite was purely Soviet, but scientific institutes and observatories of partner countries conducted ground-based monitoring and then analyzed the data obtained together with Soviet colleagues. The first fully joined satellite, Interkosmos 1, with a mass of 303 kilograms, was launched from Kapustin Yar on October 14, 1969, by a Cosmos 2 launch vehicle. It was designed to study processes on the Sun and was equipped with 6 devices: solar X-ray polarimeter and X-ray spectroheliograph of Soviet manufacture, Czechoslovak optical and X-ray photometers, German Lyman alpha photometer, and German telemetry transmitter. Information from the spacecraft was received and processed by the scientific centers of the USSR, GDR, and Czechoslovakia, and synchronous ground observations were made by almost all countries participating in the program. During its 2-month career, Interkosmos 1 discovered the polarization of X-rays during solar flares and refined data on oxygen and aerosol content in the thermosphere. A total of 25 artificial Earth satellites of the Interkosmos series were launched within the framework of the program from October 1969 to December 1991, which made a huge contribution to the study of ionosphere-magnetosphere interactions and the influence of solar activity on them. Moreover, satellites of other countries, purely Czech Magellan or Indian Bhaskara, were also launched later under this program. Again, the seemingly purely ideological and political cooperation turned out to be very useful in scientific terms. Foreign equipment was often better than domestic. For example, it turned out that cameras from the GDR were much better than Soviet cameras for Earth observation. In general, the first stage of the Interkosmos program was really successful. It became a symbol of international cooperation in the era of separation, and besides, this cooperation was really useful for all participants. But the further evolution of the program, although it produced the first cosmonaut from Mongolia, was not so unambiguous. Against the backdrop of the overwhelming success of the first phase of the Interkosmos program, the Soviet authorities began to think about how to develop and use this program, especially in the face of American success in visiting the moon. We had to quickly respond to them with something. And then, like a thunderclap, in 1974 the US started designing Space Lab, an assembly of modules with scientific equipment placed in the cargo compartment of the space shuttle, turning it into a kind of a short-lived space station. Moreover, the space station with equipment from half of Europe, the British, Germans, Danes and Italians. And in exchange for this, according to rumors, the crew of the future shuttle would include an astronaut of one of the European countries, allies of the United States, tentatively starting in 1979. Naturally, the Soviet authorities could not allow such a thing. Obviously, after the heavy lunar defeat, only an earlier flight into space by a representative of the socialist camp could confirm the Soviet space superiority. Then there was the historic handshake in space, the joint flight of Apollo and Soyuz in 1972. The Soviet-American flight on the one hand showed that nothing is impossible in international missions, but on the other hand caused resentment in the brotherly countries. How is it that you fly with your enemies but shy away from us? Therefore, it is necessary to recognize that unlike the satellites that had a serious scientific component, the manned Interkosmos was initially seen as a purely prestigious project. No, politically it looked great. People from all over the globe bound together by a common goal, the study of extraterrestrial mysteries. Initially, the USSR had an idea to repeat the Soyuz-Apollo docking, but only instead of Apollo there was supposed to be a spaceship from another socialist country. But they quickly realized that even by combining their efforts, socialist countries without the USSR will not quickly create their own spacecraft. So the flight had to be on a Soviet Soyuz with 2 people, a Soviet commander and a foreign cosmonaut researcher. But there was a problem. It would take years to train a similarly qualified foreigner. There were only 2 seats in the Soyuz, and it was impossible to occupy one of them with a pure researcher. The solution was found quickly. Durable orbital stations Salyut. The first Salyut stations were not permanently inhabited but visited. When the crew left, they mothballed the DOS and the next crew reactivated it. You could do a couple months of orbital cohabitation there and do quite a few experiments. But would people from two countries get along in such conditions? Everything changed when the Salyut 6 station was launched. Unlike its predecessors, it had two docking ports. Unmanned progress ships were sent to the second port, refueling the station with consumables and thereby extending its lifespan many times over. The concept of a visiting expedition appeared, a guest crew joining the main crew for a few days. At the same time, Soyuz ships were parked at both ports, which allowed to return everyone to Earth in case of an accident. Foreigners were to be involved precisely in the visiting expeditions. A few days will be enough for them to do some science, and this exotic experience will add variety to the life of the main crew. According to the 1976 addendum to the Interkosmos program, one cosmonaut from each participating country was to fly to Salyut 6. In 1978, a Pole, a Czechoslovak and a German were scheduled to be launched, because their countries had the strongest space program, or were the most important in the socialist camp. In November 7, 1976, the Cosmonaut Training Center began the first stage of selecting people for the Interkosmos program. They looked for candidates among pilots mostly. Their endurance and strong nerves made pre-flight training easier, especially the centrifuge. At first, applicants were screened by national commissions, which put them under a microscope both medically and from the socio-political point of view. The best of the best arrived in Zvyzdny Gorodok, where the final selection took place. The main cosmonaut and his understudy, who would get a chance to fly if something suddenly happened to the main. That is, almost never. A real squabble broke out among the leaders of the three Warsaw Pact countries over which of them would become the third in space. Of course, Honecker was especially eager, because the Americans would surely take a German on their shuttle, namely a West German. Poles appealed to the recent past, because not so long ago the USSR had disagreements with the Germans, and Poland was with you in the Second World War. Brezhnev thought pragmatically. In Germany the situation was very stable, but in Poland and Czechoslovakia unrest was brewing, so it was necessary to appease them. And it was only in Prague that this unrest culminated in the Prague Spring. Therefore, perhaps it is as a kind of apology that 29-year-old Vladimir Remik was the first. By the way, very characteristically and politically correctly, the son of a Czech woman and a Slovak man. 4 months later, Miroslav Hermaszewski from Poland went there, followed by Zygmunt Yen from the GDR. A peculiar joke was even born in Poland. Before sending a man into space, Russians launched a dog, Americans launched a monkey, and Poles launched a Czech. Having spent a week in space, Remik mainly conducted medical and biological experiments. As cosmonaut Grechka recalled later, the Czech wanted to cure cosmonaut Romanenko's tooth with a compound dental drill, but the latter did not give in. The Poles also had a program with a focus on medicine, but the Germans' focus was on the MKF-6M multispectral camera. They say that while studying the pictures taken by the German, Soviet specialists noticed that the area of cotton fields in Uzbekistan was much larger than the reports sent to Moscow. Because of these pictures, the famous cotton case began, in the framework of which 790 criminal cases were initiated and 4,500 people were brought to trial. Well, and then all other participants of the program flew into space. They were arranged in alphabetical order in the Cyrillic alphabet from Bulgaria to Romania. Almost every one of them got a funny story. Bulgarian Georgy Kakalov was renamed to Georgy Ivanov because of the surname's unpleasantness to the Russian ear. And he also almost died. His docking was disrupted due to a failure in the ship's engine, and then there was an emergency descent to Earth. Bertel and Farkas read the story to Hungarian children directly from the orbit. The first Asian in space was Vietnamese Pham Tuan, who previously became famous as the first pilot to shoot down an American B-52 Fortress in aerial combat. Then there was Cuban Arnaldo Tamayo Mendes and Mongolian Jugdardemidin Gurakcha. By the way, the latter was not a pilot but an aircraft technician. The Mongolian had a rather serious scientific program with the study of heavy cosmic ray nuclei in the interest of the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research. But for the country, probably the assessment of water reserves in the Gobi Desert and the glaciers of the Mongolian Altai was much more important. The 28-year-old Romanian Dumitru Prunariu was especially memorable to the Soviet cosmonauts because he managed to bring Romanian brandy as a souvenir from Earth to the station. After all the countries in the program sent at least one cosmonaut into the sky, the flight slowed down, but did not stop. Moreover, the new Salyut 7 station was visited by representatives of countries that were not only not members of the Interkosmos Council, but even capitalist. France, which wanted to emphasize its independence from America and did not wait for a seat on the shuttle, stood out. The scientific program was also pretty standard: evaluation of the influence of space factors on the organism and material science experiments. Plus, Jean-Luc Chrétien photographed the Earth's atmosphere and space in the infrared range using special French equipment of the Marseille Institute of Astrophysics. These images clarified several astronomical questions at once: whether there are dust clusters in the Lagrange points, what is the nature of Gegenschein, zodiacal light, and the number of atmospheric phenomena. The first Indian cosmonaut, Rakesh Sharma, also visited Salyut 7, but further space guests already came to the monumental Mir station. For example, Syrian Mohammed Ahmed Faris. He was so impressed by this flight that immediately after landing he named his firstborn in honor of the station, Mir Faris. In contrast, China, Yugoslavia or Finland, which had been invited to cooperate, did not accept the Soviet Union's outstretched helping hand. The Interkosmos program ended in the early 1990s, when the socialist camp began to disintegrate. The last manned flight within its framework was made to the Mir station in August 1988. The Interkosmos program was always regarded with a certain non-seriousness among Soviet space achievements. Well, how else to treat the first Mongolian in space? There was indeed much more politics than science there, but still, Interkosmos should not be perceived solely as a ride for honored guests. From the scientific point of view, the program fully justified itself. And it was Interkosmos that became one of the brightest examples of how science and aspiration for new discoveries can unite nations. The program has left a significant mark on the history of cosmonautics, proving that cooperation for the sake of peace and progress is possible even in the most tense times. In the memoirs of Yen, Hermashevsky and other early intercosmonauts, the message is clear. We have national borders on our maps, but our planet is one for all of us. A common and very fragile spaceship that can only be piloted together. Let us hope that humanity will learn this good lesson. Thanks for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zeman Berze, Jimmy Albin, Petr Ilich and Marina Holiday. See you guys next time.